Okay, so I'm going to talk about the characteristics and limitations of vision and balance, and also about how the two of those things interact with one another. So let's start out basically and talk about the eye itself. So we take the eye for granted, but inside the eye there's a piece of brain. People don't call it the brain, they call it the retina. But it is a piece of brain. And this very thin layer of brain material does a transduction from light into electricity. And in order for this to make any sense, that is to make the transduction of light into electrical energy make any sense to us, you have to have an image that's going to be projected onto the retina. That's done by the cornea and by the lens. And the rest of this stuff, the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor, and all that stuff is just to blow the eye up like a ball so that it doesn't collapse, it stays the same shape. And one of the things that I always have fun telling people about is that we have a blind spot. And a blind spot is where all of the fibers from the retina leave the eye and go into the center of the brain. And this optic disc is something that we all have, but we don't know we have. So if we have both eyes open, I don't know where the optic disc is. There's part of my vision is being blocked, but I can't tell where it is. So I'm going to eliminate one eye. I still can't tell where the block is. The brain has this fascinating ability to fill everything in. So you see the room, and part of the room is really not there. But perceptually, the brain knows enough about the areas around that that'll fill that in. If you really want to see where your blind spot is, you can just put your finger about 20 degrees to the right. I think that's where it's at. No, it's here. It's right about here. And it'll disappear. It's very hard to sort of see. And when you get it right on the blind spot, you see your finger disappear. And I first learned about this as a graduate student. I was taking a class in eye physiology, and the professor, unfortunately, was extremely boring. But I found out about this blind spot, and so I would cover one eye during lecture, and I put the blind spot over his head.
And so he would disappear.
He would disappear. No, just his head. And so there was this voice walking around with no head. It was very entertaining for at least 5 or 6 minutes. So we have all this other stuff. You know, this is the sclera. This is the white of your eye here. And this is the cornea, which is clear. We can see through the cornea. And when we look through the cornea, what we see is this, the iris. This is what's blue or black or brown when you look at someone's eyes. And there's no difference. And this is quite amazing. There's no difference between the tissues that make up the sclera versus the tissues that make up the cornea. The difference is the amount of water in each of the tissues. When you have a lot of water in the tissues, as you do with the sclera, which is white, opaque, what happens, the fibers, the protein fibers are all over the place. And so when light ray comes in, it'll bounce off the protein fibers, bounce around, bounce out. It doesn't get through. When you evacuate the water from the sclera, you get the cornea. And what happens is all these fibers all begin to align like this. And now what you've got is a crystal. Not really a crystal, but it acts like a crystal because everything is aligned. And light rays will pass through this, and this becomes transparent. Now, if you have something happen, you have some damage, and there's one layer of cells in the back of the cornea that pump water out of the cornea constantly. If that gets damaged, then you end up with the cornea being white. And you have to have a corneal transplant, and there's all sorts of stuff. So if we look at the eye, the cornea, the pupil, you know what the pupil is? The pupil is an opening. It's not a structure. It's the lack of a structure. So you have the iris, and you have the pupil, and the pupil is how the light gets into the eye, and we have the lens. And the lens is controlled in order to make the image on the back of the eye as clear as possible. So in the eye, in the retina, we have different kinds of receptors. They do different things. We have rods. They only see black and white. They're monochromatic. And we have cones. And they give us the color. Because the cones have 3 different pigments. The rods only have 1. The 3 different pigments give us red, green, and blue. Gee, that's the same kind of colors we get from the screen. And this screen is red, green, and blue pixels to give us color. So they're matching the color that we have in the cones of the eye. And what's interesting too is you see this little dimple here in the retina. That's called the fovea. The fovea is where we see everything as clear as possible. The rest of the eye here, you say, well, what good is that? Well, the rest of the eye is really fascinating because this part of the eye, called the peripheral retina, outside of the fovea, is where we find out what's our orientation. So if you want to be oriented correctly, a lot of times you use the images that are falling on the peripheral retina to tell you which end is up. And we'll talk about how balance, which is driven by our vestibular system in the back of our ear, and our vision interact with one another in order to give us the true percept, or maybe even a distorted percept of reality. This is just here to show you how beautiful the cones are. These really fat things are the cones. The little slender things are rods, and that's where they get their names from, obviously. And so the shape of these small rods and cones, this is a disc at the tip of a rod or a cone, and in this disc are chemicals. They respond to light. And basically this is what happens. You have an opening. I don't think I can do this. You have an opening, and so here's the cell, and here's a channel, and the channel's closed. Light comes in, a photon comes in, it strikes the chemical goes wild and does this. When it does this, there's a huge flux of ions from inside the cell to the outside of the cell, and the cell depolarizes. So that this cell changes its electrical properties, and the signal that comes from the light photon hitting this chemical, causing it to open, causing the cell to depolarize, that travels back to our brains and we say, oh, there's a light over here. Okay? How sensitive? Under the right conditions, all you need is 1 photon. So all of us, under the right conditions, can see 1 photon where we say, hey, there was something out there. Okay, so we're very, very sensitive. The most sensitive comes from the rods. If you want to see something like a star at night, you say, oh, there's a star, and you look at it, and it disappears. But if you look at it maybe about 5 or 6 degrees off to the right, it'll come back. And when you want to see something that's very dim, you want to put it on where the rods are located in your eye, not the cones. And this is another rendition showing you the different discs that they have, and also the red, the green, and the blue pigments that make up the rods. And this is the pigment, I'm sorry, for the cones. And this is the pigment and its characteristic in color for the rods. So if you look at the distribution of rods, this of course is the blind area here, the optic disc. And these are the amount of rods, and you can see that the amount of rods drops dramatically as you get close to the fovea, and then it grows again. The rod peak is out here. This is temporal. These are the cones, the red of the cones. You can see the cones peak here at the fovea, which is exactly where you want your color vision. Okay? And you can see that here, if you want to see something that's very dim, since the rods are so much more potent in terms of transducing light into electrical energy, that you'd want to put them here, because there's a heck of a lot of rods here, and the rods are very sensitive. If you have a very low light level, the cones will not respond because they're not as sensitive. And just to remind everybody, we do have 2 eyes, not 1. And what's really strange about this is that I'm showing you here the visual fields. We have a left visual field and a right visual field. And basically what this diagram is telling me is that everything from this side over goes to this hemisphere here. Everything from this side over goes to this hemisphere here. They cross here at the optic chiasm to form the bands that go into the occipital cortex, which is back of your head, that's where these fibers go in and connect up to give us vision. Okay? So it's the opposite sides of the brain. Yes?
Evolutionarily, why did that happen? Just curious.
Jeez, you know, I have no idea. I have no idea why that would happen. That's, I don't, I'm trying to think if there's a mammal that doesn't have this. And I've never heard of a mammal that didn't have this.
It's redundancy.
Could be.
Means that all signals from both half retinas get processed in one place.
Right.
So you have like two takes on what goes on in your left visual fields and two takes that get synthesized to what goes on in your right visual field. So maybe that's something to do with it.
Well, the other thing that I should also mention is that if it's this is not true in people who are healthy, if the two hemispheres are disconnected, because there's a huge band of fibers that connects your right brain to your left brain. It's called the corpus callosum. And all of the information from the right brain gets transferred to the left, everything from the left brain gets transferred to the right, and somehow we put it all together. So even though everything is divided, this is going to this brain, this is going to this brain, they do talk to each other over this big band of fibers, the corpus callosum. Now, there were some experiments that were done back in the 20s by Penfield, and there were a series of patients who were suffering from epilepsy. And there's a problem with epilepsy called status epilepticus, where you continually have seizures over and over and over again, and basically you burn your brain out, and you die. So what they would do as a medical cure, not cure, but yeah, cure hopefully, is they would go in. This is very traumatic. They go in and they cut the corpus callosum. So now these people who have cut corpus callosums have a right brain and a left brain. They have two brains. They're not talking to each other. And so they could do all sorts of different kinds of experiments now with these people. And so what they would do, the speech center is on the left side. Right. Yes, on the left side. And so what they would do is they put a car in this visual field, which goes to this cortex, and they would say, what is that? You know, it's a car. And then they put a screwdriver on this side, and they say, what is that? A boat. So these people started guessing, because they knew what it was, they couldn't say what it was. So it's a very interesting combination of the information that is passed or may not be passed, depending upon the state of the person, whether they've had their corpus callosum cut. Because we have two eyes, we have a competition. We have what's called binocular rivalry. And it's a phenomenon where the visual perception alternates between the images in the two eyes, if the two eye images are different. So if I put a house, well, let's see, what if I put my hand up like this? So one eye is seeing the class, the other eye is seeing my hand. And depending upon whether the eye is dominant or whether the information from the visual field is more important, the different kinds of dominance. You can have eye dominance, and you can also have information dominance, where people will concentrate on particular information. Binocular rivalry is a real problem when you start presenting information to only one eye, which is what a lot of people do when they have these head-up displays. They have a little monocle sitting next to their eye. Everything looks great because they can see it. But what happens is you start presenting all this information in this eye, and it's going to have binocular rivalry. Binocular rivalry is not necessarily... It's not necessarily... There we go. Not necessarily good, because you can have people that end up with headaches, they can get confused, they can get disoriented, things of that nature. So it's a perceptual rivalry. So for example, in here, you see these stripes going up and down in one eye, and stripes going horizontal in the other eye. And the question is, which one are you going to see? And what will happen in this particular case for most people is one eye is dominant, and that eye will end up suppressing the other eye. Or some people who have equal dominance, they'll end up with seeing this and then it'll switch to this, and they'll see this, and it'll switch back and forth. And so it can be very confusing and annoying for people who are faced with binocular rivalry. And that's a major problem when you start presenting information, visual information, to people, and they have to process it visually. So here's a little experiment that you can do on yourself. Is you have a little tube, and the tube is looking at this wall, and you're looking at your hand with the other eye, and you can superimpose what you see in one eye on the other. And you can see the wall in the middle of your hand. Excuse me. So you can look at the stimulus strength. That is, if you have two images, it'll be 2 seconds, you'll see image 1, then you'll see image 2, and it'll go back and forth, back and forth. Or what you can do is you can present it and bias the perceptual dominance. So you see image 1 for 2 seconds, and then 1 second you see image 2. And so this image here, the first image, will become more dominant than the other image. And there are other examples of where faces are upside down and right side up, and they're on top of one another, because they're getting upside down in one eye and right side up on the other eye. Because we're used to seeing faces that are right side up, it's the right side up face which dominates the perception of the image. So if you give someone right and left eye, where they see this and they see this, the only difference between these two images is that here, what you see is the cross-hatching has been shifted by 90 degrees. And what people will see is this. Because the background has this effect of dominating, because there's more information here, they think. I mean, a lot of the stuff they don't really know. They have ideas about how it works. And here in the left eye, the information in the center, which is competing with this information here, is not in conflict with what's going on in the periphery. And so you see here the stripes going in one direction. Okay? And so if you look at the dominance time, you can see that one image is going to be stronger than the other. So one's saying, oh yeah, I see image 1, image 2, no, image 1, image 2, no, image 1. And so that's what's going on depending upon the kind of information you're presenting. And you have to be very careful. Once you start presenting things asymmetrically to a human, you have to start thinking about binocular rivalry. It's a major problem. The military has been very interested in this and trying to combat it, because a lot of their helicopter pilots and stuff fly with this monocle where they can see infrared imagery, and that can cause disorientation. If you get disoriented, you can crash the helicopter and lead to some pretty terrible things.
Can they learn?
They do learn, yes. You can. Some people will adapt and some people will not adapt. It'll always be very difficult. Some people they'll adapt, but they'll have tremendous headaches, and they won't be able to fly with the monocle.
What if you were since birth?
If you were what?
Since birth, what if you were given a display for one eye that always pointed behind your head and one that always pointed forward? Would your brain adapt to be able to process both stimuli?
Well, that's interesting. There are people, I'll get to your question in just a second. There are people that are born with strabismus. That is, we look ahead and our both eyes move like this. But there are some people whose eyes, from birth, are turned out. So when I look at Professor Lee, I can also see Professor Jones over here. And so they're both on top of one another. And these people learn to develop a dominant eye. And so most of them will develop a dominant eye. So my right eye is going to be dominant. And so you'll be there, and I will suppress Professor Jones.
Can they control which one to suppress?
There are people called intermittent exotropes.
Okay.
They have the ability that their eyes are like this. So most of the time, your eyes are moving like this. But these people, intermittent exotropes, they can do this. So they can alternate like this. And they can switch to dominance. So that now this eye is being suppressed, and now this eye is being suppressed, and they go back and forth. I had friends who were intermittent exotropes. They were wild. When you start talking to them, their eyes start turning in this way and that way. And you don't know who they're paying attention to, It's really wild. Yes, you can, but you're going to end up with a developmental strabismus, I believe. Part of what keeps our eyes together, locked together, is the very small errors that we get when our eyes are moving and looking at things. And there's a control mechanism within our brain that tries to keep both eyes moving in the same direction and pointing in the same direction. When you break the image and you have to have suppression, you start suppressing that eye. Unless you develop this equal dominance and you can go back and forth, that would be something completely different. But I don't think, there are very few people that are intimate exotropes. Yes?
And is there a reason they don't use a binocular display, just like set of glasses, and fly an image to both eyes designed to create the simulated image of something being at a certain focal distance?
As crazy as it sounds, that's even harder to do. Because what will happen is, if you have a monocle here and you have a monocle here, the images in both eyes have to be the same. I mean, not just the same, oh yeah, there are stripes. They have to be the same size. And if the size is different, you end up with a condition called anisoconia. And that causes your depth perception to change, and things will start to shift. They'll actually rotate this way when there are different sized images in each eye. That also can cause problems of disorientation, also motion sickness. So there's a lot of problems. They try doing too, aside from the expense, trying to keep everything aligned and keep all the images correct and optically correct is a real challenge.
It's a computational issue.
Not a computational challenge, no. It's a challenge of the optics. It's a challenge mechanical to keep everything the same size, to keep it at the same distance from the eye. All of that is very difficult to do, especially when you're in a helicopter and the helicopter's doing this and things are bouncing around up and down. This can be very upsetting. So, rods and cones. I said rods were much more sensitive than cones. So this is a graph that you get from anybody when you put them in a very, very bright room. So let's suppose that it's midsummer, it's 12 o'clock, the sun is bright, 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 and you're going into a theater to watch another 3D movie, okay? And so when you're out here, you're out in the sunlight, you're operating your cones. Your rods are saturated. It means all of the chemical elements that go into making vision for the rods have already been opened. So they're all like this because they keep getting photons, and they don't have a chance to go back before they get another photon and open up. So your rods are completely saturated. They're not responding to anything. But your cones, they're fine. They're less sensitive, and so they're picking up all the light, the color, and all the wonderfulness that's out there. You go into the theater, you close the door, bang, it's completely black. So now you have to find a seat. You can't see anything. You can't even see the hand in front of your face. Why? Not that there isn't any light in the room, it's just that you've been operating way up here, and now the light is down here. And so the cones don't see it. They're not sensitive enough to see it. You need rods to see that level of intensity. So what will happen is the cones will then eventually start to adapt. And so what happens when they're adapting, they're making more of their photopigment. And it's not getting opened up. So they keep making more photopigment. They're getting more and more sensitive, but there's only a certain amount of sensitivity that they have, and they level off here. In the meantime, the rods keep making more photosensitive material. So they can make a lot of it, and they're very sensitive, so they drop down here. This is the luminance sensitivity that you need in order to say, hey, there's something there. So this is getting very, very sensitive. This is what happens to you when you're in the theater. And you have to wait 2 or 3 minutes before you can take your next step so you don't end up sitting in somebody's lap because you think the seat is empty. Okay? So it's rods and cones and dark adaptation. It happens to us all the time. And of course, this is really weird. I didn't know that we had eye muscles until I was a graduate student. I was what, 22? I went 22 years without knowing I had eye muscles. What was causing this? So we have 6 eye muscles per eye. And we have mainly the medial and lateral rectus. These are the muscles that pull our eye to the right and to the left. And we have the superior to inferior rectus, and that moves the eye like this, so it rotates up. Now, we have a superior oblique, and we have the inferior rectus. The superior, and superior rectus, sorry. The superior oblique. And what this is so good. What happens is, look at this muscle. It goes up here, it travels along here, this little blue line, comes here, inserts here. And when that becomes activated, what your eye does, it torts. Like this. So you can move this way, you can move this way, and you can go like that. And you say, oh, I never do that. You do it all the time? Yes. I just did it. So what my brain is doing is when I tilt my head, I'm getting signals and my eyes are going like this. Not a lot. The gain is about 110, but I do make a torsion movement. So the eye muscles here are there to put things of interest on the eye, to try to keep the eye stable as a stable platform to look at things. As an aside, when I was getting my PhD, there was somebody who got his PhD by Rich Vallier. He taught people how to make voluntary torsional movements. So they would sit in this apparatus. We had this camera on them. I have the film, I just can't convert it to electronics. And they would go, and their eye would tort. It's really scary to see that. He taught himself to do it, and he broke a tooth. He did. I don't want to go into it. So, the question that we have is, how do we see things clearly? So, we have a lens in the eye, we have the cornea, and we have two dots. Okay? So the two dots form a point spread function on the retina. And when that point spread function gets too close together, we don't see two dots. We see one dot. So here we would see two dots. If they got closer together, like this, with the point spread function here, you're not going to see two dots. So there's a limit to our resolution. Part of the point spread function comes from the optics of the eye itself. Any kind of optical element, you're going to have a point spread function for it. And no different for the eye either. This is so interesting. This is called Mach bands. This is a perception. This is a perception that nobody can defeat. You can't learn not to do this. So with Mach bands, because of the way in which our eyes are the retina is connected up. The retina has this center surround where the surround can be one polarity, maybe it's activation, and the center could be inhibition or vice versa. So it's basically a filter. It's a spatial filter. And when you pass the spatial filter over something like this, what you end up with is it's dark. At the transition, what happens is you end up with a spike that goes down and goes up. I exaggerate. And then it's dark, spike up and down. So you have, if you look at this, you can see that there are lines where it's brighter than it was and darker than it was. So if you had black versus white, you would see an edge here that was blacker than black. And you'd see something on the other side which was whiter than white. You can't not see it. And unfortunately for two physicists who published a paper saying that they had discovered some new thing about crystallography, they didn't realize that what they actually discovered was the effect of Mach bands on their data. And they had to retract their publication. You know, crystallography, they have X-ray crystallography, pass the X-rays through the material, they end up with this diffraction pattern, and then from the diffraction pattern they can say, oh yeah, this is the structure. Well, it wasn't the structure, because the structure was contaminated by the Mach bands that they perceived, which really weren't there. So if we're looking at visual acuities, the human normal visual acuity is about a minute of arc. That's minimum separational acuity. If, example, you want to look at vernier acuity. Now, vernier acuity is very nice. Vernier acuity is how close can I get these without an error so that they line up down, like that. That's vernier acuity. And a lot of times they use vernier acuity in order to align They use it to align the optical elements so that something is in focus. Because your detection of blur is not as good as your detection of vernier acuity. And so when you look through your lens and you see these two half circles and they're moving back and forth and finally they're right on top of one another, that's vernier acuity being at work. There's also stereo acuity, which is even better than vernier acuity here. And then there's minimum separable. That's just a little tiny dot. So we have different kinds of acuity. Not just, oh, how good do you have 20/20 vision? Well, you have 20/20 vision, but look at your stereo acuity. It's very, very fine. This is the best slide I have ever seen. This was created back in 1970-something by Fergus Campbell, who is in England. I think he's still alive. And what this is, with your finger, you can move along this until you don't see the black and white stripes. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating the modulation transfer function of your entire visual system. Just like you have a black box and you say, boy, if I know the equation that describes what's inside this black box, if I know the input, I can tell you what the output's going to look like. Well, this is what's inside the black box. So you look at this, you draw the modulation transfer function, and that modulation transfer function is the transfer function for your visual system. You can take anything, pass it through that transfer function, and get a really good estimate of what things are going to look like. So the modulation transfer function looks like this. Spatial frequencies in cycles per degree. This is 1, this is 10. It goes to about 20 or something like that, where it's really good. So you can see that the modulation transfer function here is something that you can mathematically describe and talk about and look at its effect on different kinds of input. So we're going to talk a little bit about depth perception. And this is monocular cues to depth and linear perspective. So linear perspective is just nothing more than saying that as things get farther from you, they get smaller, which is exactly what happens here with the distance between the railroad ties here. But there are things that can go wrong. For instance, if I look at this, there's a white bar here and a white bar here. Which one's bigger? Oh, come on, you've seen this before.
Well, top one, to the point, there's a line down the screen that helps.
Thank you. That's cheating. No, they're not the same. No, they are. But yes, the perception is what?
The higher one is bigger.
Yes, the higher one is bigger, right. Oh, there's another thing I got to tell you about. When you go to the Art Institute, you go to any museum, and you want to look at classic art, you know, not modern abstract art where it's just lines and stuff, where they have structure. Look at the picture with one eye. The painter painted the picture and is trying to convey monocular cues to depth to this image. And when you have both eyes open, your brain is getting conflicting information. The stereo, the information from both eyes, come in and it says, hey, there's a wall there with a painting on it. And so that conflicts with all the monocular cues to depth that are in the picture. And when you cover one eye and look at the picture, if you give it enough time, all of a sudden there's this three-dimensionality that comes out. Because the conflict, this says, no, there's not a wall, stereo wall there. This is just a picture with the monocular cues. It's like looking through the window. So try that next time. It's very, very, very effective.
Bob, why do you say the artist painted it with one eye? What do you mean?
Not to say one eye, with monocular cues to depth.
Why?
Well, because he has a two-dimensional painting. I mean, he can't put stereo into the painting, right? He has to use monocular cues to depth in order to create, you know, the shapes and the distance. I mean, he used perspective, right? Smaller people farther away, bigger people closer, that kind of stuff. The artist's tools.
I understand that they are two-dimensional. I don't quite connect to why they're monocular.
Oh, they're monocular because the cues give you depth information without two eyes. So, perspective. I can get depth information about perspective by covering one eye. So that cue is a monocular cue. You can use it with both eyes, but it's just as good monocular as it is binocular.
But the artist used both eyes painting the painting. So he would have put stuff onto the canvas such that it looks in depth if you look at it with both eyes.
That's true. That's true. But the only thing that he can transfer to the canvas are monocular cues. I mean, he may have a sense of that's 15 feet. He gets that from stereo, okay? He gets 15 feet. And he can say, oh, this is about 15 feet in the photo. And you can do that. But when someone looks at it, they're not going to get the stereo that the artist saw. Unless, of course, you take pictures. Now, electronic pictures is stereo. This, you can see that this person looks larger than this person, although, of course, the cue is that they're all the same size. And, of course, shading has a lot to do with whether the contours are coming out at you or going back in. And the monocular cues for depth, here, if you have an object, A to B, your eyes have to swing out. This is a convergence movement, okay? And if the movement, I don't know why that's covered. If the movement is moving across, you get motion parallax as well. Motion parallax is this. When I move like this, the camera is moving at a different speed than everybody in the background can. And I'm getting depth from that. And I can do that with one eye. So motion parallax is a monocular cue to depth. You probably get that when you're riding in the car, and you look out the window and the picket fence is going by and the tree's way behind, and the picket fence is flying by and the tree's just sort of gradually moving to the right. And of course, occlusion is probably the most important cue to depth that you can have. So with occlusion, that is one object obstructing another object, gives you information on which object is closer to you. Does anybody not see the cat?
He's flaring.
What's that? You see a dog?
Yeah.
I say that.
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, you're supposed to see it. I'm just testing because everybody says it looks like a mud pile. So here you can see what happens with lighting changes. Depth perception here, this really gives you depth, depth, depth because of the aerial perspective, the atmospheric blurring of the image as you go farther and farther away, because there's more junk in between you and the mountains. And so also perceiving size, say, wow, look at that. Two spheres that are exactly the same size. Isn't that wonderful? But if you put an object in between them, all of a sudden they can have different sizes, or one being larger than the other, merely by placing something in front of them or beside them to give a cue of depth where the brain now is interpreting this as being, oh, it must be behind the truck. If it's the same size as this, it must be bigger, so the one that's farther away must be bigger. Because it is farther away. It's not on the same plane. So when you perceive size, on your retina, you end up with, say, the person who's farther away with this much on your retina, okay? But when the person gets really close, it doubles or triples. It gets this big. And yet, if I walked from here right in front of your face, you wouldn't say that I was more than 6 feet tall. You wouldn't say, oh, he looks about a foot tall. And then as I got close, you say, wow, he's 6 feet tall. No. I retain the same size no matter if I'm standing here or in the back of the room or anywhere else. And that's called size constancy. It's a very important property. Because if things change with changing distances, I really don't know what we would do. It would be very hard to navigate in the world without size constancy. And here's another example. The wheels are the same, but the people aren't. And you can take this and say, oh, this is a small person, or you can say, wow, this is a big wheel. So this is the illusion that doesn't work. I love this. This is, oh, I can't remember the name of it.
The Ames room.
Ames room, thank you, yes. So, same kid, same dog, and they just move from one end of the room to the other. And I've seen this. I've seen like live people doing this, and it's a lot of fun. What happens is the room is actually skewed, so that this part of the room is much farther away than this part of the room. But because you look at it through we're using one eye and you look at it from a particular and only one perspective, you get the sensation that the room is actually a regular room when it really isn't. So, I want to talk a little bit about accommodation, because accommodation is very important. It's one of the things that has stymied the use of head-mounted displays and optical systems used for the eye, which is now finally coming to a close, I think. Accommodation, of course, is the way in which you can change the focusing power of your eye. I'm past my 60th birthday, so I have no accommodation at all. I have to wear reading glasses. But all of you have accommodation, so you can look at the things on the wall and say, oh, that's clear, or you can bring your fingers up close to your face and say, oh, that's clear. And what's happening here is that your lens is changing its shape. So it's adding anywhere from 10 to 16 diopters of accommodation to your eye. So it allows you to look at things very close to the eye. So this is what the eye looks like, the lens looks like when it's relaxed, and this is what it looks like when you're looking at something very close up. And so you can see that this thing bulges in the back here to give you the change in accommodation. And these just show you a little bit about that, whether you're myopic or hyperopic or emmetropic. Emmetropic means you're perfect vision, perfect clarity. It has to do with whether the optics of your eye matches the distance of your eye. That is, the distance between your optics and the back of the eye. When they're perfect, you're emmetrope. You don't need glasses. If you're too much power here, or this eye is too long, then the image is formed here in the eye, and you become myopic. And the other one is emmetropic. So that just gives you a little bit of this. The reason I'm doing that is because now we have, coming out maybe this year, maybe next, a head-up display contact lens. This is a lens that you wear on your eye, and you can see things that are on your glasses. So now you can have a piece of glass which can give you an image, and the image can be written on your retina. And this is basically how it works. This is your glasses here. This is a glass from your glass frame. And it's got an image that's being projected on it or being used to display on it. And this little ball here, this little nub here, is being used to collimate the light so that the light in the center here, you see what's on the display. I'm going to give you a demonstration of that. So they're putting it on this camera.
An optic contact lens can be placed on the camera lens analogous to placing a lens into your eye. With this lens in place, the camera is now capable of seeing objects placed very close to it while still being able to focus on normal distance objects. With the camera mounted into an optical test bench, a microdisplay can be rotated into position directly in front of the camera. This will allow simulation of what a user would see when putting on their video sunglasses. In this demonstration, the distance view is provided by a large flat panel TV in the background. As the microdisplay is rotated into view, it is brought into focus by the micro-optical components integrated into the eye optic contact lens. Notice that these components do not interfere with the camera's ability to see the background normally. The camera is able to simultaneously view both the background seen in the microdisplay's image, even though they are drastically different focal distances. As the microdisplay is rotated away from the eye, full view of the background can be seen. When the microdisplay is brought back into view, notice that it is sharply in focus, but the frame around it is not. This is because the frame is not emitting polarized light like the display is. The eye optic contact lens only allows close focus of objects emitting polarized light. With the eye optic contact lens removed, the camera is unable to bring the microdisplay into focus because it's too far inside the camera's normal focal range. This very much is the same situation you would see if you tried to directly view such a close display. The microdisplay can be placed on the inside of a normal sunglasses to create stylish eyewear that do not reveal the display panel hidden within. Much larger images can be viewed than is possible with existing electronic eyewear. Transparent displays will allow the viewer to see electronic images superimposed over the surrounding world. With enhanced vision capability provided by the eye optic contact lens, a variety of near-eye displays not previously possible can be created.
Okay, so that's coming. I think this is very exciting. I want to move on and talk about your balance system. This is called the vestibular system. This is a picture of people flying in space. And these people have a very difficult time knowing which end is down. Very difficult. So much so that they can throw up. There was an incident reported where there was a crew member on the space lab who was working on a module like this. So this person is working like this on this stuff and says, oh, down is this way. Of course, there is no down. There's no gravity. But this is down. And his buddy was coming along this way, upside down, like this. And he looked, he saw his buddy who was upside down, and his perception said, guess what? You're upside down. He's right side up. And so he flipped, he inverted immediately, and began to throw up. So, disorientation can be very, very difficult when you don't have a balance system. What happened in that case is where the visual system is telling you which end is up, and which one do you believe, which is more dominant. So there must have been something in the environment that made the person believe that this person was the dominant down and not his down. So the vestibular system is this organ that sits in the back of your head, back here, and it has 3 canals and it has 2 otoliths. Basically, all of them are innervated with these little things here called hair cells, which little hairs come out into this gelatinous material on top of our rocks. Okay, this is just calcium otoconia. And what happens here is if, for instance, the static position sensors, if I do this, then gravity pulls on them, the rocks fall this way and bend the hairs. If I rotate like this, then it's the canals that cause this, it's called cupola, causes it to swing back and forth and bend the hairs. Now what happens is that when you begin to rotate, you end up sensing the rotation, which gradually decays as you have a constant rotation, because this will only detect acceleration, not constant velocity. And so when you stop, you end up with this big return here, depolarization of your sensation. So basically what happens is this. You rotate this way, so your eyes are closed, say, oh yeah, I'm rotating to the right, and then after a while, you're rotating and say, well, I stopped. What's going on? And then you stop, actually stop, and you rotate in the opposite direction. Because your canals has this fluid in it, and the fluid is going in this direction. When you stop, it doesn't stop. It keeps going and gives you the sensation of being in the other direction. So I'm going to show you this. What's that? Mark Letash?
The guy?
I know, you look familiar.
Mark Letash.
Is he really?
It's from UIC.
Have I stopped yet?
Have I stopped yet?
I don't know if I stopped.
No, I was going to stop her.
Ooh, I'm dizzy.
And so she's spinning now in the other direction.
I'm dizzy, I'm spinning.
Alright, speaking out and spinning the other way, this remote will take away the dizziness of doing so. Or just counteract that spin. Okay, we're stopping now. Open your eyes again, you should feel a little better.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the last thing I want to talk about is the interaction between the visual and the vestibular. There's this wonderful mechanism that happens when you sit in a room. Of course, you've all experienced this. It's called vection. You're sitting in your car, and the car next to you starts to creep up on the light because it wants to get ahead of you. And so you're not paying attention. You're just looking ahead, and this car is moving in your periphery. And of course, there's this Porsche behind you. And all of a sudden, you think, I'm rolling backwards. I'm going to hit the Porsche. My insurance is going to triple. And so what do? you step on the brake, and you say, oh, I was stopped. I wasn't going anywhere. What was going on was your peripheral retina was detecting the motion that was taking place on the side, and it was feeding into the same area of the brain where the balance system or the vestibular system is. And you're getting the sensation that you were moving. That periphery of orientation comes when you have peripheral interaction. So if you have someone, someone in looking at this object and it's moving, and when they walk, what happens is, so consider this. Someone's walking down Michigan Avenue, they have your little goggle on, and they have the human augmented display come up. And the human augmented display is so great. It's this great game. It has things popping and moving in your field. And all of a sudden it starts to rotate. You're rotating information or images in the peripheral retina. That makes the person feel like they're beginning to tilt. Like this. So they end up tilting and they end up walking. Instead of walking straight, they walk to the left and hit a tree. Or walk into the street. Or hit a building. So where people are going to use these devices, how the people are going to use these devices, and what the interaction of vision with other sensory systems can be under those conditions is something that we all have to start thinking of. Any questions?
It also works on animals. I brought my dog into the cave once, and there was a virtual environment, and he was walking, and then suddenly he started leaning as the graphics swung around.
Yes.
It was about the display that you showed us. You're telling us that an example of the that they've been able to put on the contact lens.
Yeah.
So my question was, as I was sitting here watching it, I was having to focus back and forth on those two images, even though they're both in focus. Does that create that? I'm just trying to remember what you called it, binocular vision issue.
Binocular rivalry?
Yeah.
Yes.
In one eye. So I mean.
Yes. Absolutely. That's what the helicopters pilots see. When they're flying around, they're seeing the real world, and then superimposed on that, they have stuff.
But then, so what is the? So I see the advance in making images up close, not blurry, but it still hasn't dealt with this binocular.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it a problem? Yes.
I had a problem with that video clip. The thing about head-mounted displays or this thing with the Nemo characters. The idea would be that this would be a transparent display, meaning you see the Nemo characters superimposed on the user's normal field of view. You wouldn't see the background of the aquarium.
Yeah, I'm thinking about fun.
Transparent display. Because what we basically saw was an inset video set into the person's field of view.
Yes.
And that's not really how this is supposed to work. The information that's important in that case, I'm assuming it's the Nemo characters.
Yes.
You see them floating around in the normal field of view, you wouldn't see the Nemo characters' environment, including the rest of the field, right?
Yes, but it could be that you could have an augmented display where you could actually see the real world and the computer graphics.
Yeah, so right here.
Or you can have something where you see only the computer graphics where it actually blocks it.
I want to see the fish or the starfish and the rest of the boats in the background.
So you want to see the boat. Yeah, you can do that, but that's obviously that's not this particular demonstration.
So that brings up a question about this binocular rivalry, because if you have a perfect overlay that both what's out there and what's here are in the same visual perspective, like that they're both visually the same focal length, and you just have these human augmented things, you have little creatures running around, then do you think you'd still run into this binocular rivalry issue? Because wouldn't your brain perceive those two images to be at the same distance?
Rivalry hasn't got to do with distance. It has to do with different images in each eye.
Okay, but let's say I close my one eye, then I just had mine.
Then you don't have binocular rivalry because it's no longer binocular.
Okay.
when I asked my question earlier, I was effectively talking about this idea of augmented reality displays, where if you could somehow produce an image, have it computed so that you've got the image being projected onto both eyes, so that it produces the simulation of an image in real space at a certain focal distance. That's kind of what I was hoping for, overlaid on reality.
Yeah, you can do that. Again, it's difficult to do because. Good.
But the challenge there, and I know everyone is trying to work on this problem. And the challenge there, you still have accommodation.
No, but this
conflict. That's a conflict.
It's accommodation.
Because if you have these glasses on, you're seeing the distant object. Your distant object is really accommodating out to
infinity. Yes.
Infinity. Your computer graphics that is supposed to also superimpose it so perception you think it's part of the object is accommodating still.
No. That's
what this is for.
That's what this does.
Okay.
This takes the object, which is a centimeter from your eye, and turns it into a collimated image, which means that it's like it's coming from infinity.
Okay. So then you have to match it very carefully to
the outside world.
the outside world.
Yes.
So you need a tracking
Yes.
system.
What Professor Lee is talking about is, suppose I have one of the lenses on, and it's such that in order for me to see the creatures clearly, I have to relax my accommodation so I'm looking at things far away. But what if I'm working with something that's really close? All of a sudden my accommodation changes to be here at 4 centimeters. But in order to see something, if I change my accommodation, then that object, which is at infinity, I can no longer see that clearly. So, for example, you can look at the wall here, and then put your finger here, and then focus on your finger and tell me, is the wall clear? That's what's going on. You're going to still, in cases, certain conditions, you're going to have a conflict between the object that you want to look at and its dioptric power. Whether you're accommodating for it, or whether you're accommodating for the other. So that can still happen. Yes?
So if you have two of these contacts, and you would still have this binocular rivalry because the mechanical limitation is that the contacts wouldn't be exactly the same?
In both eyes you're talking about.
Right.
Okay, if they were in both
I have
eyes.
the exact same image in both eyes, just like I don't have any binocular rivalry right now going on. So if I
No,
have
that's fine.
two contacts in the same thing,
Yeah.
one in each eye and do the same thing.
That's right. The operative word is exact.
Right, but so the real mechanical limitation is the fact that each contact wouldn't necessarily be exact.
That or some part of the system would not be exact.
Yeah.
That it would have a different size image. You could have some other kind of problem with it. But if you said yes, let's suppose that it is exact, then you're all set.